Well, welcome to St. James, and this is our third session for our Lenten program, Journeying with the Homeless, and I'm really, really pleased that you're with us tonight. And I'm especially excited about our honored guest, Dan Young, and I'd like to introduce him. I'm letting a few of the stragglers come in and get seated. I would like to just introduce you, Dan. Dan brings years of development experience to his latest venture, Camino Enterprises. After 20 years in real estate development, he joined the Irvine Company and led its large-scale development division. Not only does his wealth of knowledge come from years in private sector, he also brings a distinct understanding of development from the perspective of a publicly elected official. Dan was elected to serve on the Santa Ana City Council from 1983 to 1994 and was elected as mayor of Santa Ana from 86 to 94. And will share his vision for how developers can help provide housing for homelessness, but I assure you it goes deeper than being from a developer perspective. Tonight we have kind of journeyed from working with a person from the LA Times who was a reporter and bringing the story of homelessness alive to us through his stories and through his photographs. And then second, we met with an author who really went through her personal experience working with the homeless. And tonight, Dan, as I hand over the meeting to you and myself, I wanted to just say that we're going to try to hit homelessness tonight from a holistic point of view. And we're going to learn what approaches are being used today, what's working, what's not, and how to create a sustainable outcome to solve homelessness from the perspective of permanent housing and, go from there. So I welcome you, Dan, into St. James. So we're kind of doing a CNN town hall tonight. And so after I talk with Dan, we have a dialogue. We're going to pass the microphone around, and I would ask you to take the microphone and stand up so we can not only see you but hear you. You may say, I don't need a microphone, but we are recording this, and so you need the microphone for us to catch your voice. Does that sound good? Great. All right, Dan, the natural question, how the heck did a developer get into working with the homeless? And give us some background on where you are today.
So I did not wake up one morning and say, this is going to be my next season of life. I did not. And I'm still trying to answer that question. I think there's a series of events that I could convey to you that might tell a little bit of the story of how I became engaged and then more engaged to where I am now. So I serve on the board of directors of Hoag Hospital. And in that capacity, when we meet, we talk about the problems that the hospital is having. And one of the more serious problems that kept coming up over and over again is that the emergency room was taking on more and more cases of people who were homeless, who were arriving simply because they were homeless. They may or may not have had a serious medical issue, but they felt safe to be there. And some of them did have a serious medical issue. But then more and more of them started to show up with serious mental illness issues and addiction issues. And so we started to ask ourselves, are we doing the right thing by these people showing up? We take anybody who comes to the emergency room, both by law and by mission. So whoever it is, and we don't ask on the way in the door, let me see your wallet, let me see where you're from. We ask that on the way out the door. So we admit everybody into there, and so we started to see this incredible growth of visits to the emergency room, and many of them were getting more and more acute, meaning that the people who were coming in, they were coming in frequently. We'd see them a lot, and we would see that they would be becoming more acute with either their mental illness or their physical illness. And they started to deteriorate. And if you're going to be an emergency room doctor, your passion is to get people better. It's the only reason you'd be in there. Imagine how chaotic it is for any of us that have had to go through either ourselves or family you have to be on mission to want to do that work. And so it breaks their heart when they can't treat someone. And so we don't have psychiatrists, we have medical doctors now. These days we get more mental health professionals in there, not enough. And we don't know what to do with someone who says, I'm sick, I don't feel good, and I'm homeless. Where are we going to send them? So we started to look at that issue, and I ended up getting together with Dr. Rick Afable, who at one point was the CEO of Hoag Hospital. He was promoted up to the CEO of 6 hospitals, St. Jude's, St. Joe's, Mission, and as well as Hoag, and then he retired. And we decided to get together with 2 other individuals, a psychiatrist who was working within the Hoag system and a clinical psychologist in the Hoag system, and started to ask the question of who are we not calling? Who's in charge of this? What do they need? And we just want to know how to fix the system. I'll back up to say, if you get ill right now, there is a system to take care of you, and it's very good. A paramedic's going to arrive quickly. You're going to be assessed. They will be on the phone through the ear with the hospital, and by the time you're there, they're going to be ready for you. And that takes you through emergency room, hospital bed, recuperative care, and follow-up. That's a system. Okay, so what's the system here for mental illness and addiction services? What is that? We found out that there wasn't a system to fix. There was no system. There's no system. Imagine me telling you, good luck with your health. We don't have a healthcare system here. To us, it felt wrong. It wasn't just something missing. We were deeply affected by it. That led to a calling of organizations in Orange County, about 80 of them. We're at 100 now, and a movement. And the movement's called Be Well Orange County. And we committed, as 80, now 100 organizations, that we would design and implement a world-class system of care for mental illness and addiction. And we didn't know what that system looked like. But we made that commitment. We decided to be the coalition of the willing. So that led me into the Be Well movement. The Be Well movement needed an organization to build stuff, own stuff, start stuff, and that became a nonprofit called Mind OC. And I went on the board of directors of Mind OC. So you can see how I'm slowly getting dragged straight into this, right? So now I'm on them, and they said, well, you know, if we get great clinical care in a facility, and we stabilize 90-some% of patients in 60 days, most of them in 24 hours, but in 60 days, what's going to happen on the 61st day if that individual is homeless by virtue of also not having any money? So we felt we needed about 500 units of permanent supportive housing, affordable housing, where we could get people stabilized for a year or 2 and then get them on their feet, employed, and so on. That led me to meet with an individual who was in charge of all of the cities of Orange County in a coalition called the Association of Cities, and she's here tonight, Heather Stratman. She was the CEO of that organization. I said, what are you doing about it? Aren't you people supposed to be approving these houses and all? It was actually much more polite than that.
Not really.
Well, kind of. She now accuses me of being a little bit tough on the topic, but I don't think it was. Anyway, so she said, it's a bigger issue. We need to have both. We need to have these permanent supportive housing for mental illness. We need to have them for other populations. So I didn't really understand the story very well, and even though I'm a very experienced housing developer, having been head of the Irvine Company there for a long time, I thought this is a specialty I don't understand, and I asked, is there anybody who can mentor me? And she's here tonight, Helen from Jamboree Housing.
Your fan club's here.
Yes. And I said, okay, teach me about this. Tell me, how does this work? What is permanent supportive housing? How do we make this happen? How do we go from day 61 to true stabilization of that patient? And so that became kind of a draft description of a system, from the street to treatment to long-term stabilization. And we'll talk about that tonight in some detail. So from Hogue into the Be Well movement creation, into Mind OC, and then I got a call from a very old friend of mine, and his name is David Carter. And he's a federal judge here in Orange County, if you haven't read about him. And he said, be in my chambers. And if you ever meet him, he does talk like that. So I did show up at his chambers. I went in the back, and he said, look, I don't have any patience for this. We don't have any shelters for emergency. We don't have any part of this system. He had come to the same conclusion. The ACLU had sued a bunch of cities. We had a big encampment out at the riverbed. And he says, while we clean that up, I want to set up a negotiation with all of the cities through this lawsuit, and I want to get out of it emergency shelter beds. Because it turns out we maybe only have about 400 of them. So that got me to helping Judge settle the lawsuits between the cities and the ACLU. So it dragged in further, right? So that is kind of the general construct. There's a little more to it, but that somewhat answers the question of how I got involved and some of the venues that I have been involved in that lead me tonight. What I hope I can do is begin to describe for you what a system looks like that actually solves the problem. I am a believer that the problem is solvable. I think this community can solve it. Just the same way as it would be unacceptable to you if we said, oh, 2 people in emergency, which one gets to go to the hospital? Because there's no room for the other one. Which one? That would be unacceptable. That's not our standards here. So why would we do that to those who are suffering from the disease of addiction, the disease of mental illness, or the circumstance of homelessness? I think it's solvable, and I hope we can devote our time tonight to talking about that.
Can I dovetail? I've been talking to a lot of people in this room about AB 448. You've been in Sacramento also. You've also been working with, politicians. Can you touch on that before we dive? Because this is part of your journey. If you could touch on that a little bit. Because I think that's indirectly how you and I came to meet, was through the senator's office. Yeah.
So what happened is that as we got into this issue that you take the homeless census in Orange County and you say, okay, of 5,000 people homeless, say tonight, about half of them have found their way into one form of shelter or another. I'm very suspect of that number, by the way. But nevertheless, the other half are on the street. And that number turned out to be, on the basis of the census, about 2,700 units. So Heather, as CEO of the Association of Cities, convened all the 34 cities, and we met in a community room maybe a couple years ago now. And we talked about, can we actually take on the goal of causing to be built 2,700 units of affordable, permanent supportive housing units. By permanent supportive, what I mean is an apartment building, there's services on site. Just think of it that way. Whether they be counseling, we'll check on you every day, help you get a job, make sure that you're taking your meds, following up on site. Because we find the failure rate goes dramatically up the minute you have to go find those services. Okay, so let's bring the services there. So that's permanent supportive housing. So out of that, it was really Heather's idea, not mine, to create a housing trust. And a housing trust is nothing more than a joint powers authority organization jointly owned by all 34 cities, should they decide to join, and the county. Now, why did we need that? Well, 2 years ago when this discussion started and we convened them, it wasn't pretty. All they talked about is what you're not doing. And it's your problem. It's not my problem. And all this and by the way, I think you're hiding money. You have money to solve this problem and you're hiding it. This is what was going on in the room. And so we had to bring the volume down. We had to create collaboration. We had to decide we have a big goal. We had to commit to that goal. And then we had to create a permanent forum where these cities could come together at the county and meet and collaborate and bring money here. So the bet was that if we created the housing trust, that there were some propositions on the ballot this last November that would pass. That's a bet. And there would be plenty of money, and all Orange County had to do is have a single voice of all of these cities to get our fair share of the money. And so we're in that business right now. The housing trust has been established. The county joined. A couple cities have joined. Hopefully in these next few months, other cities will join. And we're going after our first funding bill to bring money in. Last November, $4 billion was approved on the statewide ballot for this kind of housing, this solution that we desperately need here. It's entirely possible that we get little to none of that money. Los Angeles, San Francisco, these are politically powerful places. And so we have to have a single voice. We can't go up there as one city in Orange County competing with another city in Orange County. What we have to do is have one single voice. That's the purpose of the Housing Trust, and actually where we met, and she's been bugging me ever since. I don't know, do you know this about her? I assume some of you people go to church here. It's irritating.
Yeah, but I'm making you think outside the dots.
Thank you for that.
So when we met, you said a couple of times, money's not the issue. It's kind of the political climate. So can you talk a little bit about that?
There's a lot of money in the system. If we were tackling this problem in Texas, where local government just isn't funded the way it is, and state government isn't funded the way it is here in California, it'd be different. We'd be struggling. We'd be relying upon philanthropy and so on. Yeah. In this state, we should have philanthropy behind it, but nevertheless, there's plenty of money in the system. There's $6-7 billion at the statewide level for one kind of affordable housing program or another. Mm-hmm. The problem is they're complicated, they don't work well together, we can't get our fair share. We got system issues, but nobody ever says to me, boy, wouldn't it be great if the state stepped up and funded something? On mental health, those of you that are high income earners know that you've got an extra 1% on your state income taxes that goes to mental health programs. That money's collected statewide, and then it's distributed on the basis of population, I think it's population, to counties, and this county gets maybe $170 million a year. That's new money on top of the existing programs. That should move the needle. So this isn't a case of where's the money, how do we get the money? This is really a case of the really harder, more difficult to explain. How do you bring literally several hundred agencies, programs, community groups, faith organizations together in a collaborative environment and spend it correctly? Correctly means not that you don't do something that misuses the money, mm-hmm. but that you're not there to spend the money. You're there to fix the problem, outcome-based. So that's really what our work is. Our work is designing the model, focusing on the patient, measuring our outcomes, and holding us accountable. Mm-hmm. And believe it or not, maybe it's not so hard for people to believe, that system doesn't exist, hasn't existed. It's getting in place now.
Okay, so walk us through what you're trying to do, because you you want to create a system holistically, is what you've told me.
Right.
And I can see you as a builder, and I'm kind of the same. You're building a foundation right now. So where do you expect this to go?
So first of all, we wouldn't build this church or a house without a plan, because how do we know where to put the plumbing, the electrical, and how do we make sure that the house is going to stand? Okay, so we need a plan.
Right.
So Mind OC is writing a plan that is a system that involves all of these organizations. So as we inventory the organizations, what do you do? What do you do? We're in a room. We hold meetings. We were down at Saddleback Church's San Juan Capistrano property, right off the freeway, for 2 days, just talking about, what do you do and how do you collaborate and how do we work together around different specialized aspects of this. So we're designing that system, drawing the plans for the house so that the electrical, the plumbing, all the systems, subsystems work. I want to describe it really in 3 simple areas because we can make it very complicated, but it's really not. Number 1, we need to meet the patient where the patient is. Okay? So I fall over, I'm having a stroke. You don't say, oh my God, you better call your doctor. Or you better go down to the doctor. No, care comes here. So wouldn't it make sense that we would have a mobile unit that could go out to where the homeless are and see them where they are and begin to coach them, coax them into accepting an alternative other than the place that they're at? And there's reasons that they're there. And it's difficult. And sometimes it takes multiple entreaties to get them to respond. So we need to have a mobile contact system that's robust and goes where they are. Now, we just did a point-in-time count, and we now have it on GIS. Not that people don't move all the time, but we can get a good sense of how many places to go, how to build the system, how many mobile units we need. So think about that. Now, what if that unit had medical technicians on it? We may be able to treat you right there. We don't need to take you to the hospital. Now we've saved a whole bunch of money. So we need to meet them where they are.
Okay.
We need to be able to take them to treatment if they need treatment. Sometimes they're there by virtue of poverty. Sometimes they're there because of domestic abuse and they're hiding. And it happens far too often.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're there because of medical issues. You have to go to the hospital. But why would we take you to the hospital if it's a mental illness issue? Well, where are we going to take you? The answer is we don't have anywhere. So at that point, we had an urgent need to create think of it as an emergency room with 60-day beds, stays, for mental illness and addiction. Didn't exist. So we decided we needed 3 of them. So we took all of the emergency room data and looked at it and said, how many visits are you getting? How big does on any given day and month, how many visits at that a year? About 30,000 visits a year. And then where are they? And we geographically picked the 3 areas that we need 3 clinics in. Those clinics need to be about 60,000 feet to take that capacity. And so we designed the first one at 265 Anita and Orange. And we're going to break ground in May.
Great.
On the very first one. The whole world of behavioral health is watching this all over the country. Because if we get this right, then you won't go to the emergency department. Or worse, jail. You're not a criminal, but you're acting out. I need to get you undercover. You're going to jail. All you've really done is created a more acute situation. So no jail, no emergency room, this clinic. This clinic will not look like a hospital. It will be very inviting, homey. Because remember, we're about calming and then treating. So the design matters, which is a little bit of my Irvine Company thing that snuck in there. So if we build 3 of these, and we will, the first one now, we're negotiating on a piece of land in South County for our second one. We'll get a third one over in the coastal area. I'll let you guess where. It's kind of fun. And once we have three, then we have three 60,000-foot clinics staffed by mental health and addiction professionals, not medical doctors. If we need medical help, we'll get it. And we're going to take you in, and about 80% of the people who come through the door into that emergency room, because it'll have its own emergency room, for 23 hours, about 80% can be stabilized and sent to a good place for stabilization after 23 hours. The rest we have to keep for 30 to 60 days, okay? So where's that emergency room today if it's not a hospital? We have one. It's a sad little building built in the, looks like the 50s to me. I grew up in Santa Ana, and I think it was there before me, so it's really old. And it has 12 beds. We're 3 million people. 2 years ago, the hospitals of Orange County received 12,000 people, visits, 12,000 visits in the course of a year in their emergency rooms of people who were homeless, and also many of them had mental illness. And by the way, of all the hospitals in Orange County that received those 12,000 visits that year, which one, I'm going to ask you, which one received the most visits? Put your hand in the air if you think it's St. Joseph's over in Orange, St. Jude's up in Fullerton, Mission and Mission Viejo, or Hoag Hospital.
Hoag.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's Hoag. So that tells you a couple things. Number one, that problem's not over there. That problem's here. That problem is not somebody from Los Angeles. Those are your kids. And I can testify to the fact these are the people who live amongst us. There's very few from the outside. So we have to be committed to these three clinics. Treatment, street, treatment, and the third one is the 61st day permanent supportive housing. Those are the three elements of the system.
So vans, medical, housing. But
Correct.
there's also layers to that housing too. So how do you
Lots
address
of
that?
layers.
Yes.
So for example, in this journey, we were talking about it before, as a priest, it happens to her all the time. I'm not trained in this, but my profile has gone up in this issue, and so people come up to me, even in parties, and they'll have read or seen something I'm doing on it. And I always know what the story is when they grab my elbow and they squeeze it too hard. And I always, when I feel that, I always turn to them with a smile, because I know I'm going to hear a heartbreaking story. And they just don't know what to do. They have all the money in the world. They don't know what to do. So our obligation as a community is to help people with those unique circumstances. So in the main, the vast majority will only need permanent supportive housing if there's an affordability issue. Most people go home. You reunify families. You've got this terrible situation at home. You don't even know how to do it. You're afraid. You don't know what's going on, what happened here. You reach stabilization, maybe you get to go home. And that happens a lot, mostly. Then we have people who are on their own and need permanent supportive. And then we need specialized care. There are people who need to be in what we hope to build are micro communities. There's a few of them around. Mm-hmm. Don't ask me for addresses, but they're around. And they will receive a small community of schizophrenics. In fact, there is one. They were in the paper here this last year. There's a small community of people who are schizophrenic who are living together in Santa Ana. They're over in, Helen, isn't it the west side? John Henry Foundation, okay. John Henry Foundation bought a collection of homes and said, we're going to bring people in who have schizophrenia and who are not going to be able to go home. They have to live in this community together, and they take care of each other. So then they went down and they wanted to expand. And they went down to the council for a hearing. And everybody was braced. Why? Because the place was full. Uh-oh. Guess what? They were all there to testify in favor. We love these people. We take care of them. They take care of us. These are the nicest homes in the neighborhood. We think this is a good idea. So we need to find more of those for specialized circumstances.
So I want to go back to the politics of things.
Yeah.
What's the political will? I think things have changed in the last year, or it's just that I've been, dealing with it a lot here at the church too. But it just seems like this is at the forefront of people's minds more, and is it politically? Do you think the political will is there now? We talked briefly about it before we sat down.
Yeah.
Why don't you share about that?
So I think I want to share both the good and the bad, because I
Right.
think this community, we need to be honest with each other.
Absolutely.
First of all, I would say on the encouraging side, just even in the past 2 years, I've seen that it's not an issue of the left or the right. It's a community issue. And it used to be, this isn't any of my business. Now it is our business. Now, it could be because it's impacting your neighborhood, where you shop. It could introduce fear to you when you see somebody that is uncomfortable to see out there who's homeless. But nevertheless, we're all seeing it. And so the community has said to its electeds and to its organizations, city government and so on, county, you better do something about it. That's created more of a consensus, let's get something done. And quite frankly, I've watched Republicans in this county as well as Democrats rally around, let's go after it. And it used to be philosophical. Forget it. We're not going to get involved in that. In fact, if you ask yourself, how come we don't have a system? There's a reason. We don't believe in that stuff. That's for private sector to do. And we took a philosophical position in this county, and it failed. It didn't work. And I say that as a Republican. It failed. We should have had the system. And it should have been a public-private partnership system. So the consensus is building that we need to do something. But the fear of the electeds is that when it gets down to the specific of building something near you, and NIMBYism comes out, then there's a lot of retreating that goes on.
Define NIMBYism.
NIMBYism is basically saying, I am desperately interested in this issue. And I think we need to build 20 houses here, but not here.
Not in my backyard.
Not in my backyard. We need to build them in your backyard, right? So until we get comfortable with the fact that these can be built and they can be managed properly and they're not going to be a problem, and until we prove that, then we're going to have to suffer some NIMBYism. There's a project Helen did up in Irvine, and it's called Doria. And it's in a village that we built. I think it's Stonegate, right? Yeah, Stonegate. So one of the villages of Irvine, and it's in there. And I could take any of you there, and if I didn't tell you the name of it is Doria, and I said, find it. I'll give you $100 if you find it. You can't find it. You can't find it. It's beautiful. It looks like the rest of the neighborhood. It functions marvelously. And 99% of the people in the neighborhood have no idea that it's specialized housing, permanent supportive housing. And you've done, I don't know, half a dozen of these in Orange County, and I think your pipeline's probably 10, 15 more. And we've got a whole bunch of other nonprofits that are doing the same thing. So until we fight through the NIMBYism, and we fight that through with places tonight. So part of the reason I'm here tonight is I don't need to be making speeches anymore. I was an elected official back in the Middle Ages. That's over with. But I'm here because part of winning is convincing the community that we have an obligation to do this together. And if it gets a little uncomfortable, suck it up. We got to do this for each other. In the same way that if I've got to drive you to the hospital on a day that's inconvenient, I do that out of love. And we help in our church. We do that out of love. And until the community fully embraces that, and it's starting to, I mean, it's amazing the good that I see. So the electeds right now are, in my opinion, they've shifted in a good way towards dealing with the problem, doing away with partisanship, seeing that there's money out there and wanting to put it to work. I think that they're becoming believers in this system idea, that let's make it a system so that we have a legacy not of buildings and programs, but actually a system of care. I think they're believers in that now. The execution is when we run into politics. Now, 265 Anita is a good example. It won. The council said, great, let's do it. In fact, if I may, I want to tell a little story. So,
Go ahead.
265 Anita, we buy the property, the county owns it. Now, we're not dumb. We made sure that the county bought the property because they can provide their own zoning. So even if the crowd showed up, we were going to do it anyway. But out of courtesy, we went to the city of Orange and, whoom, they want a meeting right now. And we had this meeting. And they said, how can we help? That was turning a corner. And God bless them. They were terrific. They dealt with the community. They said good things in the community. They calmed down some neighbors that were freaking out on us. And it went really, really well. So NIMBYism, I think, is probably the #1 issue to getting this done in the next couple of years versus it taking 5 to 10 years.
Got it. So I want to touch on one thing that I've been harassing you about. And by the way, I never introduced myself for people that know. I'm Reverend Cindy Voorhees, the vicar of St. James.
As if you
Halfway
didn't
through,
know.
you kind of go, oh my gosh, I didn't introduce myself. So I'm going to dub you the mayor of homelessness. How do you like that?
No, thanks. I got enough.
But I do want to, we've been talking about one of our first lunch dates we had. I talked to you about AI and technology and kind of shook you and said, yes, all this is great, but how do we share the data? And you said, you just looked up into the sky and said, yeah. So where are you at with that now?
It's getting to the forefront. It's not in the forefront. It's getting to the forefront. So you can't get to contributing all the data here so that we can do the analysis and see the patterns, test the outcomes, determine what works, and do the right thing quickly. That's what artificial intelligence, that's what data analysis can do. We can't do that if each person in this room represented an organization that provided services and refused to talk to each other. So job one was getting you in the room, okay? And then getting you strategically to sit next to you because the two of you compete. You get a grant for something that looks an awful lot like what you do. So can we pull that together? And so we started to build relational collaboration. At the same time, describing the services, programs, and buildings that we need for the system. And at the core of the system will be data integration. Now, that is a really tough one because when you deal with healthcare data, it's protected and it's not supposed to be shared. And you can't tell the cops that somebody's in here with mental illness for obvious reasons. And there's all kinds of things that are really, really challenging with that. But is it achievable? Yes. Is there work underway to do it? In my opinion, it's one of the things that we're going too slow on. I think we'll see a data integration system here in the next few years, and I say that sadly because it could happen in the next 6 months. San Diego is doing a good job. What grade would you give? A, B, C, D? B+. San Diego's doing a good job today of data integration. Arizona, would you give an A or a B? A. Yeah. So Arizona
it's a model.
It's a model. So the other day I said, can we just go steal that?
Yeah,
Okay, let's just take it, right? So
Yes.
maybe we do that.
okay, got it. All right, well, I don't want to, I do kind of want your time, but I want to open it up to everyone else too. Because the last question I have is, where do you see, if you were to wave your magic wand, where we would be in 1 year?
In 1 year.
Yes, not 3 year, 5 year, 10 years. I'm giving you 1 year because I'm a pain in the neck.
It really is a bad
Well,
question.
I've seen all these,
So-
I have seen a lot of discussion and meetings and
Yeah.
discussion and meetings and discussion and meetings. So, and I know you're like me, let's get it done. So where do you see it?
I think in 1 year, we will be halfway built with 265 Anita, our first 60,000-foot clinic, which is unbelievably important. I think in 1 year, we will have a legitimate pipeline of 1,000 units of permanent supportive housing
Awesome.
that will be in a build-out over the next couple of years, but a legitimate funded pipeline. I think we can do that in the year. I think we can have the template for data integration in a year that will allow us to track patients, alter the system, and measure outcomes. I think we can do that within a year. We'll have the template for it. Full implementation may take a little longer. I think that we'll be underway with our street program.
The vans.
Probably in a pilot. In fact, somebody here tonight brought a press release of Cal Optima.
Yep.
They're going to fund some money for a street service, mobile navigation system. I think we'll be underway with that, and we'll
That's a
be
lot.
using that to model what the ultimate will look like. So I think in all three areas, remember we had three buckets, we had street, treatment, and then stabilization. I think we'll be well underway to building the first
Wave.
20% of the system itself.
Awesome. Okay, we'll come back in a year and we'll compare notes. I want to open it up to
Should do this
questions.
to you too. You know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's why we're here. Thank you. Do we have a microphone we can pass around? Thanks, Bob. If you could stand up so we can catch you.
Yeah, Cindy gave us all some homework assignments, and one of the movies that Karen and I watched, actually was the most interesting one, was the documentary about the hotel kids of Orange County, and it seems that you're addressing mostly individuals. I don't know if you're familiar with this documentary or not, but it's about, and actually I drive by it on my commute around Knott's Berry Farm and Bueno Park and going down Beach Boulevard towards Stanton. Evidently, these hotels have families living in them because they can't afford any other kind of housing. So they live basically hand to mouth. They're all working probably at subsistence jobs. Are you doing anything in this program, although this seems different, are you doing anything to address this particular situation with families?
So first of all, although you didn't say it as homeless, allow me to say something and then get directly to where your question is. First of all, if there's a family out there with kids that are homeless, we're radically on that, and I think the system's doing a reasonable job of getting those families placed. And I've been through a number of places where we take them in. Now those are shelter; that's not even motel. But I wanted to mention that that's part of the system design. Okay. On the motels, unfortunately, because we don't have enough affordable housing, permanent affordable, I didn't say services, permanent affordable housing, because we don't have enough, what happens is that the motels become the shelter of choice, right? So I think I'd rather have them in that motel than I would some of the shelters I've seen. At least you've got the privacy with your family, right? But that's not where they need to be. I am a lifelong builder, and I am not admired by a certain sector of the Building Industry Association for what I'm about to say, but I have believed my whole career in inclusive zoning ordinances, that you're not going to be able to build unless you build a percentage of that housing as permanently affordable. The entire city of Irvine, from the beginning, is inclusionary zoning. If by virtue of ratio, the rest of the county had built the same proportion of housing as Irvine did under inclusionary zoning, we'd have 50,000 units of affordable permanent housing right now. But the politics, the builders won the day with the councils, and they didn't do inclusionary zoning. So this is being taped, and honest to God, you'll have me in trouble again. So thank you very much for that. But I don't care, because I fought this in Tustin when Tustin said, are we going to do inclusionary zoning? And I supported it, made the industry mad. I don't care. We should now, for the rest of the build out, a lot of it's gotten away from us, we should have permanent affordable as part of our regimen for how we build our communities. The state's going to come in with a whole bunch of money for affordable housing. It will be part and parcel of what the nonprofits do, because usually can't build just permanent supportive. It's got to be part of a larger affordable project. So I think over time we can add to it, but not quick enough. We probably need, by estimates, a good 50,000 units of affordable housing, and then we can unload the motels and so on. It's a big task, very doable, especially in a state that's got a whole bunch of money, if the cities will commit to it. Those motels serve a good purpose, by the way, if we can get nonprofits to own them, but not necessarily for families, but for individuals. Unfortunately, it's families now.
Down the road. Any other questions? Behind you, Bob.
Hey, thank you for coming out tonight. I assume you are aware of the Chinatown development that was just approved by the city of Los Angeles, where they nixed all affordable housing at the College Station of the Golden Line, where this developer does not have to build any affordable housing because they got around the city council. I'd just like you to comment on that and see, that's Los Angeles. How could we avoid that in Orange County?
So number one, yeah, I'm aware of it, and there's another project in Koreatown where it just happened. It's tragic. It's just utterly tragic. It is bad public policy, and it just shows you where the political pressure is, because what'll happen is someone will argue, well, I don't really want to do it, and they'll get the community on their side. So I'm doing a project for my own, through my own company in San Mateo, and we're doing affordable housing as part of it, and that community has embraced affordable housing. It's really easy. It's amazing. I just go to these hearings and I think, oh my God, can I borrow you? This is unbelievable. But the community embraced it and said, we need to do this. The problem is that NIMBYism meets the political agenda of an elected, and then they say, okay, you don't have to do it. If you had inclusionary zoning that mandated that 10% had to be affordable, then it wouldn't be a question, it'd be by ordinance. But when it's an individual negotiation, some get away with not doing it, some end up doing it. And we have developers who are very committed to doing it no matter what. They're just going to do it. So I am aware of it. It shouldn't happen. Those are incredible lost opportunities, and they're very expensive to fix. Because now you float a state bond, now you got all that mortgage money that goes in to pay off the bond, so you get a net amount of money, and you go into a very expensive area and try to buy existing rundown property and turn it into affordable housing. That is massively expensive versus doing it right in the beginning.
How can we avoid it in Orange County?
Well, I think that this is kind of intriguing to me, because here we have a faith-based organization, we have a church in a community that's very wealthy that could advocate. You could say to your city council, we live here, we have our faith here. We have our church here. We believe in this. We want people to have a roof over their head. And we want it to be affordable. And we would like to know, what is your strategy for creating affordable housing?
What's the plan?
What's the plan? And until that voice is there from people that they look at and say, I'll bet you all vote, right? Until they see those faces of the voters, they're not going to change. Now, we have some who get elected and they just believe in it and they're terrific. But for those that don't,
Right.
they need to hear. So part of this, I think, and what I've enjoyed, I like to tease you, but I want to say something good about you, if you don't mind,
No.
is that the faith community has not done enough. It's time for the faith community to step up. I get it. We go out, we feed them. I get it. We go out and we take care of some people. All good. Don't mean to diminish any of that. But we need to do the hard thing of confronting the government and saying, we're here as community, we're here as faith-based community, and we want to tell you that we're going to support you if you take care of these people, if you do the right thing. It doesn't have to be negative. You don't have to be confrontational. Reward them with an opportunity to come in and tell you what they are doing that is good. I remember some years ago, I don't remember what year it was, but a nonprofit bought a little, was it a motel down here on the West Newport? And they wanted to put veterans in there, in poverty, and put veterans in there. And the neighbors were going, no, just screaming and yelling about it. And there was a member of the council who organized the vote, I think, on Veterans Day. And basically said, really? And won the vote. You go out there today, the neighbors are perfectly fine with it. It's a wonderful part of the neighborhood, and they do a beautiful thing. That's really something you can do. That's your voice as a church. You're led by a priest who's willing to educate you, create the opportunity for you to learn. And if you're willing to put that learning to use with your voice, gently, respectfully, you have no idea how influential you are. And I say that as a former elected official. This is one hard voting crowd. I can just look out and I can see. This is probably somewhere in about the 90 percentile. And if you're an elected official, you do that assessment. You look and you go, hey, what do we got here? Wow, we got a hard voting crowd. Well, be a hard voting crowd, but be it for something that matters. And the least and the lost, that matters.
Any other questions? They're always shy at first. They're shy at first.
It's okay.
Thank you for coming. I've really enjoyed it. As a sideline, I was going down 17th Street today before Newport Boulevard, and there where many homeless people kind of sit at the bus stop, there's a big sign showing a homeless man asleep and saying this bed cost $100,000.
Yeah.
And I just noticed it, so this is perfect. The other question I have is, what about low-income housing in the Great Park? Did that happen? Will it happen?
Hasn't happened yet. I think that we have a wonderful opportunity. There's a piece of property that the county kept when they conveyed the base to the city, and then that was sold off to the builders to create the money to build the park. They kept a piece of property up on West Alton. You'd almost think it's Lake Forest, and it's a perfect opportunity to do some affordable housing there. I think we can really get something done there, and I'm hopeful that Irvine, both the city and the county, as owner of property, we'll move forward to get something done. May I say something about the $100,000? I get it about the bus shelter, but it reminds me of another story. There's a guy in Jamboree Housing, George Searcy, and he collaborated with St. Joseph Hospital, I think it was, and Cal Optima, who provides health insurance to Medi-Cal folks, okay? And they set up this little pilot, and I want to say it was 15. So these are 15 people who are in and out of the ER, like all the time.
Frequent flyers.
Frequent flyers. And those frequent flyers were costing them 6 figures. And they demonstrated by getting housing, whole person care, the 3 tiers, they were successful in lowering that to $25,000 to $50,000 a year versus 6 figures. So even if you approach this on a pure business basis, there is so much money to be wrung out of the system doing good that it makes it even more compelling that we should get about the business to do it. These patients can cost $250,000 a year. And all we do is spin them out in the street so that their acuity goes up. It's ridiculous. It's bad business, and it's wrong, but it's bad business.
Thank you. Any other questions? Sure.
I was on the redevelopment agency in Newport Beach for many years, and on Mesa Drive we put in affordable apartments, probably over 100 of them. This is back in 2000. My question is, do you heard about what Costa Mesa is buying a large building on Airway Avenue by the airport for the homeless?
I believe that's a shelter. That's different than the housing. So Judge Carter basically is trying to create shelters, which are emergency shelters. Think of that as like the Armory, where they're open air facilities. And I think that's a shelter that they're creating there.
Right up here.
Would the mobile unit and other solutions would it be possible for UCI medical students to have some responsibility there on their rotations, on their medical rotations, which would be less expensive maybe?
Yeah, so this is a very cool thought. Not only, yes, is that a good idea that they could, but remember the 3 clinics that we're going to build? We want to have one of them be a teaching clinic. And so that the students out of UCI, and by the way, most of the healthcare workers and mental health care workers we produce in this county are out of Cal State Fullerton. It's UCI that's the psychiatrists, right? Well, there's a whole bunch of other people. So both the health workers out of the universities as well as UCI, we hope to be able to have one of these devoted to training, but absolutely they should do a tour in these mobile vans. And we hope to have that kind of medical expertise within within those vans. Yes.
I think we had a question over here with Ann.
Stand up and use the microphone. Victor's orders.
The mayor of Costa Mesa 2 weeks ago took her 72-year-old mother and her 95-year-old grandmother to the emergency room for 2 different reasons at Hoag Hospital. They were there from like 2 o'clock in the afternoon till way after midnight. Every bed in the emergency room was taken up by either detoxing addicts and alcoholics or homeless people that were seeking shelter. And she got into a conversation with the doctors and the emergency room nurses, and they said this, as you mentioned, is a terrible problem, and people think this is not going to affect them in Newport Beach, but the next time you try to get in to the Newport Beach emergency room and you can't get in there because of the problem we're talking about tonight, I really think, especially with the elderly community in Newport Beach, they really, if they are NIMBYs and they're only thinking about themselves, that alone should frighten them to start paying attention.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, I have to tell you, I know about it, and I'm in complete agreement. We did, by the way, we had this weird thing happen. Every once in a while, the census at the hospital just gets really, really high. It wasn't just mental illness and addiction. It was all kinds, it was across the board. And then when you add in that, we were in the corridors. It was pretty amazing. So yes, it does happen. And if I took you tonight over there, not just the ER, but I took you around the halls, and you saw someone sitting outside the room, looking in the room like this, in a chair, that's a monitor. Now, is there not a better place for treatment and stabilization during a mental health episode than that incredibly expensive hospital bed? Yes. Is there something that's going to result in them stabilizing quicker by getting them out of a traumatic environment like a hospital? Yes. So we're doing this wrong. The good news is, and I would emphasize, that if we can get these 3 clinics devoted to mental illness and addiction, it offloads what you just heard about from Katrina Foley, the mayor over there, who, by the way, is doing a good job on homelessness. She's just about cut her deal with Judge Carter, so God bless her, okay? So I think that when these clinics open up, it will relieve a substantial burden that is currently in the ERs of all the hospitals. Yes.
Thank you. I think one more question, and then we'll wrap up.
Got more than one.
Thank you. I actually have a question for you, Reverend Cindy. But thank you so much, Dan. It's just such a pleasure. I'm actually with 211 Orange County, and so this morning we had a board meeting, and we've been listening to calls of people that call in with crises. And I'm going to cry again.
I know,
I was
right?
here last week.
That's how I know you.
I couldn't ask my question because I started crying.
It's okay.
So sorry.
It's okay.
I'll get to my question. It was very hard. Today we listened to another call. We forward about 50 calls a month to NAMI, calls with crises, people that are going to commit suicide, etc. And so today's call was very impactful because I don't take these calls. I'm in the business department. Anyway, so my question is for you, Reverend Cindy, because the mental illness component is such a huge part of just this whole issue, right?
Correct.
And that in itself is hard enough. But I just always tend to look at it more from a spiritual perspective. Mm-hmm. And I'm not exactly sure what my question is, Reverend Cindy, but I think that's why I'm addressing it to you, because when I heard that call this morning, literally, like, our board members were just stunned. And so was I, and I was more, just kind of watching, because I wanted to see, like, how the level of understanding and engagement, and just to see what the questions were going to be like, right? Mm-hmm. But for me, it was obviously also it was just very clear, that call that came in, that person, it was determined that it was kind of a mental health issue, but I don't believe it was. I believe it was a spiritual issue. I mean, this person may or may not have been on drugs, I don't know, may or may not have had a mental issue, but the way that he was just crying
For help.
and for help,
Was he suicidal? Is that what you're saying? Or?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
And I don't know. We're actually, that was one of the questions we were going to follow up and see what eventually
Right.
was the result of that call.
Right.
But the point is that when I heard that call, I did a little bit of training with Mariners on their care counseling program. And when I heard this gentleman crying for help, he was so mentally in tune. And anyway, the point is that it was just, for me, it was clearly spiritual oppression. And anyway, so.
No, I appreciate the question, and I think Dan, here we go, poor Dan. We've had these, iPad wars with talking about the fact that the spiritual component in this system has kind of been missing. And then I'm an advocate that a lot of this is spiritual. Now, on the other hand, I'm a very probably both sides of the brain person. The brain is an organ, and people forget that. And in my pastoral care, you'll just see parents send off their kids to college, and when they come back, they're not the same person, not politically or educated, but mentally. There's something that in young men, especially at that age group, girls are early. If you listen to mental health authorities, usually at 16, you can see something. But it's an organ, and so people don't realize, I have a bad heart. Well, you can have a brain go haywire too. And those are the truly mental issues of schizophrenia or bipolar, but there's this other component I think that's hugely misdiagnosed or missing, is that spiritual component of being lost, hopelessness, isolation, loneliness, product of all kinds of family issues that have not been dealt with, kids coming out, of their sexuality. And I think that the church needs to do more. I also think we're sitting here and we're offering it, but people aren't coming in the doors anymore, because of the structure and the distrust. So absolutely, I think on a lot of this component should be a spiritual component that can assess, is this a spiritual breakdown? Because so many people don't have the anchor of a spiritual life anymore, because people stop going to search for some sort of spiritual education. I'm not saying that, and I'm pretty liberal here, I'm not saying that this is the answer, this structure, this building, but it certainly is a great start. And so I would just encourage people to listen to your heart. It's excellent that you listened. And I'm trying to talk more and more about this. What this whole system is, it's, I think, a huge component. And there's several priests in the room that would probably are shaking their heads yes. We have 2 or 3 in here. That we have to get back to our spiritual base. I mean, if it's in a mountaintop or in a church, it's super important. And you know what I find also too is that when you get down to when there's an emergency in the ambulance or something's what do the people really want? They want prayer right then and there. I mean, I've seen car accidents, and I'll get out and say, "Do you need a chaplain?" And the victim will just pray for me, So I don't think we've lost it. I think we've lost our way. So hope that answered your question. One more.
We had an author in last week from Charlotte, North Carolina, and they're working on a project that sounds somewhat similar to what you guys are working on. Are you collaborating with other successful projects, cities? I think San Antonio or Austin has done that in terms of trying to address the acute or chronic homeless. Back to the AI question, are you learning from what they've already learned? Are you going to share information with them? How's that going to work?
Yes, we are. We're looking for best practices anywhere we can find them. We probably don't have enough people doing that work. We could use more help and more engagement of people to do the research to find those best practices. For example, I did not know about this woman and her work until she came out here for the church. But yes, we need to do more of that. We do a bunch of it. I mentioned San Diego and Arizona and other things that we're looking at. So yes, we are doing that. And everything we do is being shared. What I found fascinating is this was kind of a nice moment for me, because most of what happens to me is I get beat up. That's essentially my role, is just take the punch. And so to be able to see that, something really kind of pleasant like this, I'm going to tell you. So I get a copy of an email from Dr. Afable, and gets this, the statewide coalition on behavioral health has hired a consultant to go around the state and teach people how to organize into a system like us. I read that and I thought, oh man, we're doing something right. So yes, we're trying to get it out there. I think something really important is happening here. I hope we can keep the energy going. And if it happens, we'll tell the world.
Thank you. I think that should be, we have some kids that need to go to school tomorrow morning. We're going to wrap it up. We have a tradition here, Dan. We give you an icon of St. James.
Oh, wonderful.
So you have that. And
So-
we also mistreat you by we mug you and kiss you at the same time.
Oh, okay, great.
A
Thank
St.
you.
James mug. So
Well,
thank
having
you.
just a couple years ago walked the Camino, thank you very much.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
I walked Camino Francis from the border of Spain and France, 430 miles, 35 days with a 20-pound pack, 12 to 15 miles a day at 65 years old, and I'm still sitting here, so it worked. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.